From the decaying ruins of the most haunted prison in America to an old Chinese fishing village being destroyed by nature, here are 10 of the most amazing abandoned places. Fort Alexander. There are some pretty fantastic abandoned places out there to explore. One particularly amazing location is in Russia at a man-made island fort that has been used throughout the years to house soldiers, to assist scientists, and to let raving teenagers have a blast. It's located in the Baltic Sea and it's named Fort Alexander. It was once used to protect the shore from invading forces after it was originally constructed in the mid-1800s. The island had to be built as well as the fort. Everything was made from scratch. The island was actually set on a series of beams that were driven into the seafloor, and all these years later it still stands. Fort Alexander has a main building, a central courtyard, and the capability of housing at least 1,000 soldiers over 3 floors. Because cannons were popular in the 1800s, it also has enough room for over 100 cannons and gun fortifications. However, even though this place was so fortified, it never actually saw any military combat. It was in too strategic of a location and nobody was stupid enough to invade the area. Roughly 100 years after it was built, the base was transformed into a plague research facility in the early 1900s. Russian scientists studied cholera, tetanus, and the bubonic plague using horses and other animals as test subjects. The fort was abandoned in the 1980s, it became a site for urban explorers, and then it became a very popular place to host illegal raves. Fort Alexander has stood through the centuries as a base for war, a research facility for the Black Death, and then a place for young people to go in order to have a party. Who knows what this fort will become in the next 30 years. San Juan Parangara-Cutiro. San Juan Parangara-Cutiro is an abandoned town with its only surviving church based in lava. At least that's exactly what it looks like. This place is located in the state of Michoacán, Mexico. The church is the only remaining structure left from the village of San Juan Parangara-Cutiro. Way back in February of 1943, a volcano erupted, but it erupted very slowly. Over the course of about a year, this volcano gradually consumed 2 villages in lava and ash. It took over 365 days for the slowly flowing lava to reach this church and melt the rocks around it. The entire town was wiped out. Everyone was forced to leave in an evacuation, but the church still stood strong, and it stands strong this day. In fact, there is now an annual pilgrimage to the church by worshippers who are convinced that God stepped in to save it from the volcano while the rest of the town was destroyed. Even more incredible is that the local Paracutan volcano, which destroyed the 2 villages, continued to erupt for 8 full years. It was not that dramatic, so you probably wouldn't have heard about it, and it's not that famous because nobody died from the eruption. But it did erupt for nearly a full decade, wiping out 2 towns and hundreds of homes. But the church stood undestroyed through it all. You can now find it frozen in the middle of a sea of volcanic rock, with its tower and its main altar completely untouched. The flooded bell tower of Kalyasin. The small Russian town of Kalyasin only has a population of around 13,000 people. It's located just 120 miles from Moscow on the bank of the Volga River. But it's not the town itself that is the subject of the story, it's their flooded bell tower. Between 1939 and 1940, part of the old town, including the main historical district and all the historical architectural monuments, were flooded during the construction of a hydroelectric power station. The old part of the town had to be abandoned so that the station could be built, but all that water couldn't wipe away the bell tower. It's the only thing that miraculously survived the flooding, and it still stands today as an incredible monument and tourist attraction. The bell tower belongs to the St. Nicholas Cathedral, which was built in the year 1800. The height of the bell tower, which now looks eerily like a lighthouse in the middle of a lake, is approximately 243 feet. It's impossible to reach the bell tower unless you have a little boat, but it's still a very interesting spot to go for watching the sunset or the sunrise. If you go at just the right time, you can see the sun rising through the center of the tower. This is definitely one of the most amazing abandoned places you can visit. Have you ever explored an abandoned place without permission? Did you trespass on a condemned building? Perhaps find an old rusted out playground in the woods? Or maybe you found a hideout along an old drainage ditch or some overgrown train tracks? Let me know about your coolest encounter with an abandoned place in the comments below, then be sure to subscribe to Titanic by clicking that big red button if you haven't already for more amazing videos. The Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary is not quite as amazing as it is horrifying. This was a radical prison from the 19th century designed to create social change, and today it is an abandoned horror house that you wouldn't want your worst enemy to stay in overnight. This place originally opened in 1829 and it was grand. It was built as an experiment to reform criminals through isolation. This revolutionary penitentiary became the model for prison design all across the world. At the time, it was the most expensive construction project in the United States of America. According to the Philadelphia Tourism Department, the Eastern State Penitentiary closed its doors as a prison after 142 years of use back in 1971. Since then, it has been named a National Historic Landmark. But there is a particularly haunting part. As a prison that operated for almost 150 years, you can imagine the types of violent and nightmarish things that went on inside the building. There were definitely murders, there may have been some torture, and there was certainly at least a little bit of death. Some of the most famous prisoners at the penitentiary include the famous bank robber Slick Willie and Al Capone. There have been plenty of tales of ghosts living inside the walls of the prison, and today you can take a special tour through the penitentiary at night, but only if you're brave enough to face the possible paranormal activity within. Battleship Island. Battleship Island is one of the most gorgeous abandoned places in all of Japan. You might remember Battleship Island without even knowing it. It was recently the location of the James Bond villain's evil lair in the movie Skyfall, but the island is far more ominous in real life. From between about 1880 and 1974, it was a tiny island off the coast of Japan that operated as a coal mine with tunnels that stretched around 2,000 feet under the main structures. The city on Battleship Island was built by the Mitsubishi Corporation to house the miners and their families. The island was basically a self-enclosed civilization with a school, a hospital, shrines, and plenty of apartment towers. But it was abandoned abruptly in 1974. This happened because the coal ran out. The Mitsubishi Corporation closed the mine, the island was evacuated pretty much overnight, and since then it has remained a ghost town with its buildings crumbling into rubble. This is a sad story for the island, especially since back in the 1950s it was considered the most densely populated place on Earth, with roughly 5,000 residents living in prosperity. Now, there's nothing left but their memories. In 2015, UNESCO designated Battleship Island as a World Heritage Site, and now if you're special enough, you can get a unique permit to visit the island as a tourist. Monel Forts. The Monel Forts are a group of old and abandoned navy towers from the war era. They're located miles off the coast of England and you can only reach them by boat. The forts were once used to guard the United Kingdom against bombs, but today they are in decline, abandoned, and gradually falling into the ocean. Because the country needed to protect itself from German bombers back in the 1940s, the answer was to build special forts out at sea so that foreign planes and boats could be annihilated before ever reaching the coastline. 3 such forts were installed in the ocean back in 1942, and they were named Nor, Red Sands, and Shivering Sands. Today there are only 2 left remaining. Each tower stood on 4 concrete legs, and inside would be about 265 men. They were assigned to live in the forts, in the cold and isolation for as long as it took to defend the country. And believe it or not, these weird-looking forts proved successful in blocking German threats. A report from Insider claims that during operations, the forts shot down at least 22 planes and stopped 30 bombs. But of course, these forts were eventually abandoned. In the 1950s, the soldiers left, and in the 1960s, some radio operators moved in and used them as pirate radio stations. However, that didn't last long, and today the forts are completely empty. Nobody can live on them any longer, as it's way too cold and they're basically decaying death traps anyway. Rumu Underwater Prison. The Rumu underwater prison is located in modern-day Estonia. It was once a Soviet prison built inside of a quarry, and no, it was not always underwater. The prison was used in the 1940s by the Soviet Union as a place where prisoners went and were forced to work 12 hours a day every day of the week. The Soviets preferred to use this prison because it was inside a limestone quarry, and it allowed them to use their prison workforce to do all the back-breaking labor that others didn't feel like doing. But when the Soviet Union collapsed and Estonia regained her independence in 1991, the old guards moved out and left the prison empty. The prison and the quarry were both abandoned during the shift, and the whole place was mostly forgotten. It fell into ruin, most of it fell into the water that filled up the quarry, and today it's a popular diving spot. This is one of the most amazing abandoned places you can visit right now, as it's wildly popular with beachgoers and adventurous tourists. You can now dive beneath the ruins of the old Soviet prison, but not only that, you can go snorkeling, paddleboarding, and you can even canoe around the decaying, half-sunken structure. This is an experience that you simply cannot get anywhere else. Gui Island. Gui Island in China looks like a town out of a fairy tale. It's an abandoned village off the eastern coast of China, and it's made a name for itself lately as an unusual travel destination. The town's name is Hutuan, and it was once a prosperous fishing village. In the 1980s, it boasted a population of about 3,000 residents, but because the village was in such a remote location, its residents began to move out in the 1990s, probably drawn by the allure of the big cities. In 2002, the village was officially depopulated and 100% abandoned, but after decades of being without people, the empty houses of the village have since been taken over by nature. Pictures of the ghost village began to circulate and tourists started surging in the region. This became a big problem for local officials as the tiny area was not equipped to deal with tourists. But they have since embraced the popularity. A viewing platform opened in 2017, and for a small fee you can hike around the village and check out the fairy tale houses. Just be careful, as there could be wild animals and spiders that are as big as your face. The Berlin Ghost Town. Next on the list is a town named Berlin. I'm not talking about the city of Berlin in Germany. This is a ghost town in the state of Nevada. And unlike most ghost towns in the Old West, which have been left to wither and decay, Berlin has actually been preserved by the state. That means you can go check out this abandoned ghost town and see exactly what it was actually like to have lived back in the days of the gold rush. The park was established in 1957, but the town itself was established in 1897 as part of the Union Mining District. It was named Berlin because most of the miners who lived there hailed from Germany. The town never really prospered like other boom towns in the area, and after the Panic of 1907, the town began to decline. By 1911, it was entirely abandoned. The town then sat there rotting until the state took it over in the 50s, and now the town is a perfectly preserved historical record of the late 1800s. But be warned, it's one spooky place to visit after dark. Bodium Castle. Bodium Castle is one of hundreds of castles located all throughout the United Kingdom, and it has a pretty cool history. First of all, nobody in the United States can understand the grandeur of the European castles without seeing one firsthand. They are simply awesome, and it is a true shame that there are no ancient castles in North America. But Bodium Castle was built in 1385. It has since become one of the most beloved castles in all of England. It has an iconic moat, it's surrounded by beautiful green scenery, and the building itself is ridiculously well preserved. The castle was originally built by a knight of Edward III, and it was designed with the intention of defending the area of East Sussex, probably from the French during the 100 Years' War. It was built not only to protect the people of the area and the family inside, but it was also built to be an exceptionally comfortable and modern home. The castle was also constructed all at once, meaning that the entire style of the building is the same. This is not something you see in most castles of that same era, as most of them were built throughout the course of a few hundred years. But here's where things get confusing. The castle belonged to a family, and then the family line went extinct because there was nobody left to carry on their name. The castle changed hands to a different family. It was then taken away during the War of Roses, eventually returned, and then under stable ownership until the 16th century. But then during the English Civil War back in 1641, the castle was sold to pay for somebody's fines. The castle was bought and dismantled, and it was eventually left as a ruin and abandoned. The castle was again purchased in 1829, but nobody really did anything with it until 1925, when it was given over to the National Trust and then opened to the public. It's truly a remarkable piece of history, and it still stands strong today. Which one of these abandoned places would you love to visit one day? Let me know how you feel in the comments section. From swallowing an entire city block to the largest underwater holes in the world, here are 10 of the most dramatic sinkholes in the world. Fukuoka, Japan. The story of the infamous giant sinkhole that swallowed an entire city block in Japan is unique and impressive for several reasons. First of all, the incident happened on November 8th in 2016. The hole came out of nowhere and swallowed an entire city block in a very busy part of the city, right in front of the doors of a 7-Eleven. Sewage pipes were destroyed, the concrete completely crumbled away, and the sinkhole immediately was full of disgusting sewage water. The hole itself was 98 feet wide and 50 feet deep. What is even more incredible than the sinkhole breaking open a giant piece of real estate in the south of Japan is how quickly it was fixed. According to CNN, the event happened on November 8th, and all traces of the sinkhole were gone by November 12th. For anyone who can count, that is only 4 days. The Japanese are so efficient that they repaired the entire sinkhole and repaved the road in only 4 days. And then it took them only another 2 days to reinstall all the utilities in the area, including water and electricity, sewage, gas, and the telecommunication lines. There is absolutely no trace of the sinkhole remaining today. Guatemala City, Guatemala. Guatemala City in Guatemala is known for several things, not any of them good. Guatemala City is generally considered the most violent and dangerous city in the world, and it is also extremely famous for its massive sinkhole. There are 2 main sinkholes in the city's history. One sinkhole in 2007 swallowed just about a dozen homes and 3 full human people. However, the biggest one happened May 30th, 2010. An enormous sinkhole 60 feet wide and over 30 stories deep opened in the middle of the city's slums, swallowing a full 3-story building in the process. Supposedly, only 1 man was killed during the incident. This is the sinkhole of the century in terms of how dramatic it is, but it is not a natural sinkhole. Sinkholes are basically like landslides, just underground, caused by erosion. But what happened in Guatemala was not due to any kind of erosion in the bedrock or underground river. It was likely due to broken pipes beneath the city. The most likely scenario is that there are pipes broken somewhere in the city's complex underground, and they caused the sinkhole. Getting it filled could take years, and even still, authorities are worried that another similar sinkhole could open unexpectedly anywhere in the city. Kentucky, USA. This is one of the most dramatic sinkholes to ever open in the United States of America, and it happened in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It also happened on tape. There is video footage of the actual sinkhole opening up beneath the National Corvette Museum and swallowing Corvettes like a hungry car monster. It happened in February of 2014, and it is one of the hardest videos to watch for any lover of classic cars. The sinkhole was estimated to be 40 feet across and about 30 feet deep, and it opened directly underneath the extremely expensive collection of Corvettes. 8 of the most treasured Corvettes in the world, all on display in the museum, plummeted into the Great Black Hole. Luckily, the museum was closed to visitors at the time and nobody was injured. But the same cannot be said for the 1962 Black Corvette, the 1993 Ruby Red 40th Anniversary Corvette, the ZR1 Spider, or the ZR1 Blue Devil. The only good news is that GM promised at the time to fix and restore all the cars once they were recovered from the hole. The exact amount of money sitting at the bottom of that hole back in 2014 was in the millions. One of the Corvettes, the 1 millionth Corvette, was estimated to be worth at least $750,000, while the Spider prototype was about $1,450,000. Dean's Blue Hole, the Bahamas. Welcome to one of the deepest blue holes in the entire world, known all over the globe as Dean's Blue Hole. Basically, a blue hole is a special name given to a sinkhole that has filled with water. Unless you're in Mexico, where blue holes are called cenotes. Dean's Blue Hole is approximately 663 feet deep, and it sits right off the shore in a bay west of Clarencetown in the Bahamas. The hole at the surface is surprisingly circular with a diameter of roughly 100 feet. However, once you descend, the hole widens into a massive cavern with a diameter that more than triples to 330 feet. Because the hole is so clear, on a good day you can see at least 115 feet down toward the bottom. There was actually a professional diver in 2010 who broke the free diving record in Dean's Blue Hole by diving all the way down to 302 feet without using fins. Then he later broke another record in the same hole by swimming downwards 331 feet on a single breath while using nothing but his hands and feet. Sadly though, in 2013, a free diver who was attempting to make a new record perished inside of the hole. Sanica Bosnia. This next sinkhole takes us to a small village in Bosnia, and if you're not sure where Bosnia is exactly on the map, it is sandwiched between Serbia and Croatia in Europe. This strange sinkhole opened up just outside the small village of Sanica, but rather than swallow buildings or roads, the sinkhole swallowed the village's favorite pond. It literally ate the entire pond. Residents walked outside in the morning to discover their pond was gone, and in its place was a giant muddy crater that looked like an alien craft had crash landed, or like a meteor had struck the earth. death. The sinkhole not only swallowed the water, but it also ate the fish and the nearby plum trees. The quiet villages were stunned by it, and while scientists gave the explanation that it was probably caused by underground water that had dried up, or even changes in soil drainage, the villagers had their own ideas. One villager claimed that it was either a volcano or a giant cave that had opened its door, while another villager claimed it was a fish that triggered an old unexploded bomb from World War II. The wild theories in the town became crazier than the sinkhole itself. According to a report by The Guardian, some townsfolk even claimed it was a sign that the end is near. Playa del Carmen, Mexico. Mexico is notorious for sinkholes. They probably have more sinkholes than any other nation in the world, known as cenotes. But while cenotes are generally beautiful places where people go for swimming and diving, a recent sinkhole opened in the middle of the highway that runs between Playa del Carmen and Tulum, and this is no cenote. The sinkhole opened in the middle of the road to expose a massive flooded cavern filled with tons of ancient fossils, but these weren't any fossils. They were fossils of ancient sea snails dating back 2.5 million years, a little less exciting than dinosaur bones. According to reports from Mexico News Daily, they also found crustaceans, shrimps, and mollusks living inside the cave water. According to experts, the cave is part of a wider system that runs beneath the state of Quintana Roo in southern Mexico, the same system that feeds water from the Caribbean throughout thousands of old tunnels, sinkholes, cenotes, and underground caverns. Patching up the road might be impossible, especially considering the entire state is built over a honeycomb of caves and chambers. It's only a matter of time until the whole place is a sinkhole. Nova Scotia, Canada. It seems that nowhere on Earth is safe from sudden sinkholes. In the small town of Oxford, Nova Scotia in Canada, a 2018 sinkhole opened in a popular park, swallowing up trees and bushes and massive chunks of land wherever it wanted. The interesting part about this sinkhole is that it turned into a massive swimming pool rather quickly. Over an entire summer, the sinkhole continued to grow into a pit filled with brown sludge and sediment. In fact, the hole got so big that locals were worried it would continue growing straight through their main thoroughfare. According to the geologists, the entire ground around the sinkhole is incredibly unstable. A local Lions club was put out of business due to the giant sinkhole. People were no longer able to use the building or the park because of the big mushy sinkhole, which is a real shame because the Lions Club building and the park were some of the most popular places in town, including where people had birthday parties and wedding ceremonies. Now the only way to hang out in the park is to take a boat and maneuver over the sinkhole, which is definitely too dangerous. The Great Blue Hole, Belize. The Great Blue Hole is undoubtedly the largest underwater sinkhole in the world. Dean's Blue Hole is deeper by a few hundred feet, but the Great Blue Hole in Belize is way larger in total volume. You can practically see the Great Blue Hole from space, whereas Dean's Blue Hole is hardly noticeable. This is the most popular attraction in Belize and is a premium destination for diving, but it is also a rich habitat that supports a lot of different types of sea creatures like reef sharks, giant groupers, and even nurse sharks. The Great Blue Hole got its name from a British diver who had been living in Belize for 6 months and compared the Australians' Great Barrier Reef to the sinkhole in Belize, deciding it should have a name just as impressive. So it was titled the Great Blue Hole, and the name stuck. It fits anyway, since this hole is the largest natural occurrence of its kind, roughly 1,000 feet across and 407 feet deep. Dead Sea, Israel. You may be familiar with the Dead Sea in Israel, as it is a huge tourist attraction that draws many visitors every year. The Dead Sea is situated between Israel and Palestine in the west and is an extremely salty lake that is over 10 times saltier than the ocean. It also has the lowest elevation on Earth, being 1,407 feet below the sea level. Recently, the Dead Sea has been plagued by sinkholes. The problem is that the Dead Sea has been rapidly shrinking in the past few decades, and now as the salty water goes away and the fresh groundwater rises up, massive underground cavities have been forming, which are often followed by sinkholes. These dangerous holes can happen completely without warning, and they don't necessarily need to happen on the sea itself. These holes can open up on roads. You need to watch out the next time you're playing in the Dead Sea. Zhaozhou, China. Yes, China has the deepest sinkhole in the world. In the forests of Guangxi, China, there is a massive double sinkhole with a total volume of about 236 million cubic feet, known all over the world as the Heavenly Pit. This sinkhole measures about 2,000 feet in length, 1,700 feet in width, and 2,100 feet in depth. It has also been known about by locals since ancient times, but more modernly has been installed with a 2,800 step staircase to better facilitate tourism. What is really impressive about this sinkhole is that it has several layers. The first layer is the giant hole in the forest, but below that is yet another hole, and the second hole eventually leads into Defang Cave and its underground river. This sinkhole is an ecosystem of its own, and it's absolutely stunning to behold. Which of these sinkholes do you think is the most impressive? From a car worth over $52 million to some of the oldest American muscles still around, here are the 10 rarest and most expensive cars. 1957 Jaguar XK-SS, $1.5 million. This car actually shocked me for how cheap it is. This is definitely the most affordable vehicle on the list, and yet it is the most gorgeous classic car in the world. The Jaguar XK-SS was a road-friendly version of the Jaguar D-Type, which of course was a race car back in the 50s. There were only 16 XK-SSs made, and man, they look incredible. Just the body of this classic Jaguar is enough to make most car lovers' heads spin. With only 16 of them having been made 50 years ago, there are not many left today. As you can imagine, getting your hands on one of these $1.5 million machines is tricky. Somewhat ironically, one of these cars was first bought in 1958 by Steve McQueen, and he paid only $5,000 for it. He was seen driving all around Los Angeles in his brand new Jaguar XK-SS, and I'm sure he had a blast doing it. Steve McQueen's XK-SS is actually worth $30 million because it belonged to him, but any other model of this Jaguar that did not have a famous butt in the seat is only going to be worth around 1.5 or 1.6. 1954 Oldsmobile F88, $3.24 million. This is what we call a boat where I come from. The Oldsmobile F88 from 1954 is one of the rarest all-American cars you'll never see in the local listings. This thing is beautiful. It was built over the chassis of a Corvette with the same 102-inch wheelbase, and its body is fiberglass. The F88 could reach up to 250 horsepower with its 5.3-liter Super 88 V8 engine. This was one of the first truly gorgeous vehicles in what would become the golden age of American cars in the 60s and 70s. This particular vehicle was sold at a car auction in 2005 for about $3.24 million. Did I mention it is the only one of its kind? There had been rumors about a second F88, according to Hot Cars, but apparently it met its brutal death in a fire. These are just rumors though, completely unfounded, and the only legit F88 alive is currently sitting in the showroom of the Gateway, Colorado Automobile Museum. This Oldsmobile is slim, sleek, convertible, and in pristine condition, and it is the most remarkable shade of gold you have ever seen. But is it worth $3.24 million? And now for number 8. But first, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you are new here and let me know what car you would like to take for a spin. 2009 Koenigsegg CCXR Trevita, $4.8 million. These cars are something of a legend. Only 2 of the Koenigsegg CCXR with the diamond weave carbon fiber exterior were ever manufactured because they were too expensive to make. While being notorious for having the most unpronounceable name in the car industry, these cars are also notorious for being quick. This car can run up to 1,004 horsepower as a direct result of its intense engine's combustion chambers. In fact, in 2009, this car was chosen by Forbes as one of the 10 most beautiful cars in the entire history of the world. And can you guess who owns one of them? It is none other than Floyd Mayweather, one of the most successful boxers to have ever stepped in the ring. This car definitely deserves the title of most beautiful. It is simply perfect and an absolute miracle of automotive engineering. I would probably give, if not my foot, then at least one of my legs to have this thing sitting in my garage. 1927 to 1933 Bugatti Type 41 Royale Kellner Coupe, $9.7 million. You may think of Bugatti as a modern supercar, but these were actually luxury cars way before anyone on Earth today was ever born. The Type 41, also known as the Royale, was a luxury car manufactured between 1927 and 1933. This thing was a beast, and it weighed about 7,000 pounds. In comparison, a modern Rolls-Royce is about 25% lighter than that. This is still one of the largest cars in the world, and I would argue it is the most stylish. If I were a global villain bent on world domination, this is the car I would drive. There were only supposed to be 25 of these cars ever built, and the intention was to sell them only to royalty as the most luxurious car ever made. However, if you know your history, then you have already realized between 1927 and 1933 was the Great Depression. As you can imagine, the advertising campaign didn't go over all that well. Not even European royals were interested in buying ultra-expensive cars in the middle of the Great Depression. Today, there are only 6 of these cars left in existence. One of them was destroyed in a wreck, and one of them, according to Car Buzz, was sold at an auction in 1987 for the cool price of $9.7 million. 1998 McLaren F1 LM, $13.75 million. There are a lot of cool supercars out there, but there is no car manufacturer on Earth that makes supercars quite like McLaren. The F1 LM was built in 1998 and is probably the only car from 1998 that is still relevant today. There were only 6 of them made, with 5 of them being sold and the 6th kept by McLaren to be used as a platform for developing the F1 chassis. Every F1 LM can be easily identified by their sweet orange paint job, which was a color chosen by McLaren as a tribute to Bruce McLaren, who used the same papaya orange for his racing color. As a McLaren, you can bet this car is more than impressive under the hood. With a 6.1-liter V12 engine, this car produces 680 horsepower and goes from 0 to 60 in approximately 3.9 seconds. Back in the day, it held the record for the 0 to 100 to 0 miles per hour. It still has a top speed of 225 miles per hour. This thing goes fast. Captain Nemo's car. This is the car driven by Nasiruddin Shah, also known as Captain Nemo, in the movie The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It is something of a cross between a limousine, a Cadillac, and a Land Rover. The exterior is ivory white and features the likeness of the Hindu god Ganesh on its front headlights. It is a pretty cool car, but it does not look that practical, and most of the vehicle is just a prop, with faux leather seats and such. It is not even road legal. What makes this car so rare is that only one of them was ever built, and it was built custom by a special production designer. According to Car Buzz, at an auction in 2015, this movie car only sold for $45,000. Interestingly enough, in 2016, a replica went up for sale on eBay for $165,000. I guess the movie prop just wasn't up to snuff. 1970 Porsche 917, $14 million. This is one of the most famous cars from Porsche, and it is famous for a couple of reasons. First of all, Porsche got their first overall win with this car at the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in both 1970 and 1971. Secondly, it was the car Steve McQueen drove in the film Le Mans. The car driven by Steve McQueen was auctioned in 2017 for the steep price of $14 million, which ended up being a record price that any Porsche car was ever sold for. As a racing car, the Porsche 917 is a rocket ship. The car is powered by a Type 912 flat 12 engine and can reach 0 to 62 miles per hour in only 2.3 seconds. If you don't know anything about cars or speed, let me assure you that is very fast. It has a top speed on the track of 240 miles per hour. Back in the 70s, this was one of the fastest machines going around the track. It's definitely faster than anything I've ever been in. 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California SWB Spider, $17.16 million. If you recognize this Ferrari 250 GT, you are not alone. This might be the most famous Ferrari in the world because of its starring role in the 80s blockbuster Hollywood movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. There were only 55 of these cars ever made, which makes them extremely rare and some of the most sought after vehicles in the world. While the car was built between 1953 and 1964, which is a pretty long time to manufacture a single car, there were several racing models built in the middle of those years. If you want to talk beauty in a car, this is it. Convertible, red, designed to be absolutely gorgeous, I would give both my legs to ride this car for the rest of my life. A little unknown fact is that the 250 GT used in the famous movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, was actually a fiberglass-bodied replica of the 250 GT Spider California. While many of these vehicles have been auctioned throughout the years, the 1961 version was auctioned in 2016 for $17.16 million. That is the highest one of these cars has ever sold for. 1956 Aston Martin DBR1, $22.5 million. Naturally, there is an Aston Martin hanging out at the top of our list. This particular DBR1 comes from 1956. It won one of Aston Martin's most famous victories around the track in 1959 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and that was not its only win. The DBR1 also won at the Nürburgring, Le Mans, and the Tourist Trophy in the same year, causing it to match with the Ferrari 250TR's record of 3 straight wins from the previous year in 1958. Throughout the 50s, the DBR1 won 6 World Sports Car Championships, which was actually a record until eventually beaten by the menacing Ferrari 250TR. This Aston Martin is not only a gorgeous racer, but it is also very fast. It has a 2.5-liter engine that pumps out 250 horsepower. It holds the record for the most expensive British-made car ever sold, selling in a 2017 auction for $22.5 million. Bloomberg called this vehicle the most important Aston Martin ever made. There were only 5 of these exact cars ever created, according to the Telegraph. That makes the DBR1 not only one of the rarest cars, but also one of the most expensive. 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, $52 million. Welcome to the most expensive car in the world. There were only 39 Ferrari 250 GTOs ever made. There were 33 made with the bodywork of between 1962 and 1963, also known as Series 1. Then there were 3 built with the unique bodywork from 1964, also known as Series 2. And finally, there were 3 limited edition 330 GTO cars built later with even bigger engines. Upon its release in the United States, the GTO cost $18,000. While you might think everyone would be racing to buy this fantastic car, the only way to buy it was to be personally approved by Enzo Ferrari. How's that for a who's who of car buying? In 2013, a collector of cars named Paul Pappalardo sold his Ferrari 250 GTO to an anonymous buyer for a record price of $52 million. That is absolutely insane. I'm pretty sure you can buy a spaceship for $52 million. This car has been nominated as the best sports car of all time by Sports Car International, while Motor Trend Classic has placed the car on their list of the greatest Ferraris of all time. Even Popular Mechanics has named this car the hottest car of all time. Which of these cars would you like to take for a lap around the track?
Number 10. The Tomb of the Red Queen. Not all discoveries can be explained by science. Take the Tomb of the Red Queen, for example. This remarkable tomb was discovered by a Mexican archaeologist back in 1994 in the ancient city of Palenque, and even today, experts don't quite understand what she was doing there. The Tomb of the Red Queen was found full of treasures. Among the treasures was the sarcophagus with the Red Queen herself inside. Her skeleton was decorated lavishly with an impressive collection of shells, jade, and pearls around her head. The woman's chest was also covered with pieces of jade and obsidian. But here's where the mystery comes in. While researchers have been calling the woman the Red Queen, nobody actually knows who she was or why she was buried in such an extravagant way. They know that she lived sometime between 600 and 700 AD thanks to the pottery discovered inside the tomb, but very little else is known. The woman would have died when she was about 60 years old. She had healthy teeth, and she likely had a diet comprised of meat. None of these 3 things were typical for the Maya people of that time. They didn't have good teeth, they didn't eat only meat, and they generally didn't live to a ripe old age. But even stranger is that back in those days, women did not have a prominent place in society. This means that the Red Queen was an anomaly. She may have been the wife of a prominent Mayan king, but researchers truly don't know the answer. Number 9. Worm or spine? The military statue you're looking at right now is one of the most mysterious pieces of art ever. Or is it? There are 2 of these statues that were actually crafted by Silvio Cossini, a very close pupil of Michelangelo. The statues were part of a project to decorate the new sacristy, which had been left unfinished back in 1534 when Michelangelo moved to Rome. And while the pieces themselves are incredible, the mystery here is that there appears to be a worm trying to slither out of the place where the head should be. There's a large hole as if somebody cut the head off of the statue, and coming from the hole is what almost looks like a leech trying to get out of the body. Of course, this isn't actually a mystery at all. It's just a severed spinal cord that looks like a worm. You can find these statues, known as military trophies, in the new sacristy at the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence, Italy. Number 8. The Ancient Winchester. Not only are scientists baffled by this next story, but so is everyone else. A seemingly legendary Winchester rifle was discovered leaning against a juniper tree in a national park in Nevada, and it apparently sat there undisturbed for 132 years. There's absolutely no story behind the weapon, but there are definitely a lot of theories. The gun had faded over the years, its barrel was rusted and brown, and it indeed blended perfectly against the tree where it was found in the Great Basin National Park. An engraving on the gun had it marked as a model 1873. After doing a little bit of research, the service employee at the national park who found the gun discovered that it had been shipped in 1882. Unfortunately, so were about 700,000 other rifles between 1873 and 1916. In 1882 alone, there were over 25,000 of these weapons made. For that reason, it's impossible to know who owned it or what they were doing with it, or for that matter, why they left it leaning against a tree. At the time the Winchester 1873 came out, it cost a whopping $50, or about $1,000 in today's money. Some people believe this particular model belonged to a roving cowboy riding high on the range. It also could have been owned by a prospector who forgot it against the tree on a hot day. But according to others, it was simply left by a hunter who probably forgot where he had leaned it. In any case, this mystery isn't going to be solved anytime soon. Number 7. Colombian Mummies. In the small Colombian town of San Bernardo, located high up in the Andes Mountains, there's a mystery that's been boggling scientists since the 50s. It all started when preserved remains were found when the local cemetery was relocated because of a flood. While moving the bodies, locals discovered that all the buried dead were in ridiculously perfect condition. They had somehow been mummified without anyone putting them through the mummification process. And while some of the natives of the town claimed that it was the local diet that helped the bodies stay preserved, that didn't make sense because the outfits of the mummies were also perfectly preserved. Basically, scientists have no idea why the people of San Bernardo refused to rot. It could have something to do with the cold weather and the high altitude, but nobody really knows. Anyone buried within the boundaries of San Bernardo became mummified with literally no chemical intervention. If you're feeling curious, you can always check out the mummies, which are being held in a special mausoleum in the town's cemetery. Number 6. The Thasian Tomb. Thousands of years ago in what is now Bulgaria, Thasian tribes ruled the land. There's not much known about these people other than what has been written by foreign historians. The Thasians instead left their memory behind in rock sanctuaries and tombs. Basically, anything connected to the Thasian civilization that lived in the days of Rome is shrouded in mystery. But one of the most mysterious of all the Thasian leftovers is Pommery. It's an old Thasian tomb whose purpose is unknown. The tomb is located inside the hollow of a hill, with the only entrance being a thin corridor, kind of like a tunnel going into a mountain. Inside is the burial chamber. Scientists have absolutely no idea who was buried here, but it's assumed that the tomb probably belonged to a wealthy family and was used as a mausoleum before eventually being converted into a temple where mysterious Thasian religious rituals were held. Believe it or not, this is just one of many Thasian tombs that's baffled scientists. Because of little documentation about these people, it's simply too hard to say who was buried or why. We may never know for sure. Number 5. The Olmec Colossal Heads. The Olmec civilization lived in Mexico back in ancient times. While most people are familiar with the Aztec or the Maya, the Olmec were also prominent people back around 900 BC. But rather than leaving behind complex tombs and pyramids, the Olmec people left behind colossal heads, and scientists are still trying to figure out how and why. The biggest issue is that the heads are gigantic. They're also located in strange places. Scientists are still unsure how exactly the Olmec managed to move the heads from place to place, or why it was such a significant thing to do. Researchers first discovered the giant heads back in 1862, but it wasn't until 1938 that archaeologists began trying to piece together their origins. So far, there have been a total of 17 stone heads discovered throughout Mexico and Guatemala. They weigh anywhere from 6 tons to 50 tons and range between 5 and 12 feet in height. Another unique feature of the colossal heads is that each one seems to depict a certain person. They were likely constructed to portray the ruler of the time, but there simply isn't enough known about them to be sure. The craftsmanship is superb, and the detail is highly advanced for such an ancient culture. Number 4. The Lost City of the Kalahari. The Kalahari Desert is one of the driest places in the world. In fact, the word Kalahari comes from the Tswana word meaning great thirst. Back in 1885, an American traveling through the Kalahari Desert apparently came across the ancient ruins of a long-lost civilization. The American's name was William Hunt, and he allegedly found large stones held together by cement, forming structures in the shapes of semicircles. He believed that he had stumbled upon a lost city in the center of the Kalahari Desert. Considering this was about 130 years ago, when stories of the ancient and lost city reached the ears of civilization, explorers were very interested. At least 30 expeditions have been launched since then in search of the lost city. However, the big mystery here is that nothing has ever been found. The original American explorer never left any notes or details about the exact location where he found the ruins. Also, he claimed that it was already half buried when he found it. That means that even if the ruins of an ancient culture are still in the Kalahari wasteland, they could have since been swallowed by the sea of sand. Basically, finding these ruins now would be like finding a needle in a haystack. In fact, some scientists don't even believe the ruins exist. Some claim that rather than finding the ruins of an ancient civilization, the Americans simply found some unusual rock formations in the desert. But regardless of whether the city exists or not, expeditions are still going on to this very day. In 2013 and 2016, expeditions were launched with the help of Google Maps to try and find any kind of anomaly that could represent artificial structures. So far, nobody has turned up any information about this possibly lost desert civilization. Number 3. The CBU Manuscript. The CBU Manuscript defies time. This ancient manuscript allegedly detailed liquid fuel and multi-stage rockets far before they were ever invented. The manuscript is about 400 pages, and it was originally found in Romania 6 decades ago by a professor of science and technology at the University of Bucharest. The manuscript definitely exists. It's a very real thing, recovered from the archives of the city of CBU. And even though it was discovered in modern times, the manuscript is believed to go back to the 16th century. However, nobody is sure who wrote the manuscript. The most likely contestant is a German man named Konrad Haas, who existed between 1509 and 1576. Haas was a military engineer originally born in Vienna. He was one of the first people ever to work with rockets and fuel, primarily by using fireworks. It's believed that this German could have figured out the secret to rocket technology hundreds of years before it was ever implemented, then described his findings in a manuscript. However, the reason why his research was lost is a mystery. If he did write the CBU manuscripts, it would make Haas a genius well before his time. Some claims say the work of Konrad Haas went on to inspire Johann Schmidlapp, who allegedly designed and experimented with the first step rocket system in 1590. Number 2. The weirdest mushroom. Let's step away from technology and take a look at some mushrooms. These mushrooms look almost like fuzzy footballs, but they then bloom and peel back to look kind of like moldy brown flowers. And no, these are not the mushrooms that you eat to see funny colors and giggle until 4 in the morning. These are known as Codioactis geister, and they're only found in a few counties in Texas and in one prefecture in Japan. You can probably guess the mystery here pretty easily. Why is there a special kind of mushroom that only lives in Texas and Japan? These two places are not even remotely connected. It makes absolutely no sense that a plant, or rather a fungus, would exist only in these two locations. And quite frankly, scientists can't figure it out. A recent DNA study of samples from both Texas and Japan has revealed the most likely scenario. It appears that the specimens, even though they look the same, were not exactly identical. They seem to have separated into two distinct lineages somewhere around 19 million years ago. However, it still doesn't answer the question of how that happened. It would make sense if the mushrooms were found in British Columbia or even Washington, since many millions of years ago the land masses would have been close to Japan. But Texas is an absolute mystery. Number 1. Saturn's raging storm. The last discovery that scientists can't explain is the giant hexagonal storm on Saturn. This is undoubtedly the largest and most violent mystery in the universe. For those who need a bit of reminding, Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun and the 2nd largest in the solar system. It's roughly 9 times larger than the Earth, and at the North Pole of the planet is a storm that has been raging at least since its original discovery by the Voyager mission in 1981. Even today, scientists have no idea why it continues to rage. So far as anyone can tell, the storm is roughly twice the diameter of the Earth. It could be a jet stream made of atmospheric gases swirling into a violent tornado, but the planet is so far away that it's hard to know the truth. The hexagon never shifts in longitude, and it has stayed the exact same since it was first discovered, other than sometimes changing from blue to red, which scientists attribute to sunlight creating a haze inside the storm. Scientists have put some theories forward. One of the theories says that it's not actually one storm, but a large collection of separate vortices spiraling out of control to create a hexagon shape with perfect boundary stability. Basically, it's a series of tornadoes swirling around to create a larger hurricane the size of almost 2 Earths. As for why the storm continues to rage, scientists are still not 100% sure. Do you have any theories about these mysterious finds?
The sunken flying fortress. There are a lot of creepy plane wrecks sitting at the bottom of the ocean, but there's something undeniably surreal and eerie about the B-17 Flying Fortress. This particular bomber is sitting at the bottom of the sea off the coast of France, and it's more of a tourist attraction now for divers than a war machine. However, the Flying Fortress in its prime had 4 working engines and 13 machine guns. It was one of the favorite bombers used by the Americans, and the one we're looking at today is just one out of 4,750 lost during the war. This airplane took off on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, 1944, with 10 men on board. They were on their way to bomb a railway system in Italy, but unfortunately met a squadron of 109 German planes on their way. The airplane was damaged, it lost its guns, and it only had 2 engines running. It was eventually forced to land at sea, where 6 of the original 10 crew members were rescued, and the Flying Fortress drifted to the bottom of the water, where it has rested ever since. The sunken B-17 is not overtly horrifying, but there is something kinda creepy about looking at this dead machine of war resting in the sand of the ocean, now home to fish and stingray. It's a great place to go diving if you're into creepy wreckage. Underwater cave skeletons. Nothing is creepier than skeletons. Inside of an underwater cave 100 feet below the surface of the water, divers have made a stunning discovery. They found the oldest complete human skeleton in the Americas. The skeleton dated back 13,000 years and belonged to a teenage girl from the last ice age. The skeleton was discovered inside of an already creepy cave in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. According to National Geographic, a team of researchers were mapping roughly 100,000 feet of underwater passages when they stumbled upon an abyss literally littered with bones. But these weren't just any bones, they were the remains of prehistoric beasts. The divers found bones belonging to saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and something called a gomphothere, which was an animal kind of like a mastodon. It was truly the discovery of a lifetime, and then they found the bones of a human. The teenage girl whose skeleton they found would have lived inside the cave system before it was flooded with water. The researchers have named her Naya, after the water nymphs from Greek mythology. After doing some DNA testing using the girl's teeth, researchers discovered that her DNA matched perfectly with that of modern Native Americans. This suggests that she was part of the earliest group of people who migrated out of Siberia and into North America. This is both a creepy discovery and an amazing historical find. The Queen Anne's Revenge. The Queen Anne's Revenge is probably the most famous pirate ship in the entire world. It was the flagship of a certain guy named Edward Teach, who you might better know as Blackbeard. The ship operated during the golden age of piracy and was originally a French slave ship before she was captured near Martinique in 1717 and renamed by the pirate Blackbeard. However, Blackbeard only terrorized the Seven Seas for around 6 months before he eventually ran the ship aground in 1718, and since then it has remained lost under the water somewhere in North Carolina. But in 1996, the shipwreck of the Queen Anne's Revenge was discovered, and since 1996, archaeologists have been scrambling to explore and document as much as they can about this legendary boat. Even though it's been over 20 years, the wreckage still has not been recovered, and the priceless artifacts contained therein are still lost. This is a little strange considering it's only 25 feet underwater and not even a mile and a half from the shore. It should be easy to salvage, but it has not been salvaged. It's still sitting underwater, and it is still a pretty creepy sight to behold. It's not the octopuses living inside the ship that are creepy or its corroded cannons. It's the ghost of Blackbeard and his crew and the long list of atrocities that took place on the French slave trader in the 1700s that make it such a disturbing thing to look at. The fact that it's shrouded in murky darkness at the bottom of the ocean only makes it that much creepier. And now that I think about it, maybe it's better that this particular vessel remains sleeping with the fishes. A Romanian Village. If you were to search for flooded towns, you would find a very long list of them. There are all kinds of towns that for one reason or another were flooded and still remain underwater, sometimes with nothing but a church steeple sticking out for tourists to come and snap photos of. But in Romania, there is something far creepier than just a submerged church. The village of Giamana was once a thriving settlement sitting in a picturesque Romanian valley. However, it was wiped off the map in 1978 to make room for not just a lake, but a toxic dump puddle. What happened here was that copper was found nearby, and the mining that ensued brought huge amounts of toxic waste that needed to be disposed of. At the time, the lovely dictator of Romania was still in power, Mr. Nicolae Ceausescu, and so he ordered that the village be emptied and the entire valley be flooded with toxic waste. Once everyone was gone and the valley was empty, the dictator began to literally pour gallon after gallon of poisonous waste into the valley, turning the once peaceful village into a giant puddle of toxic sludge. Today, all that remains of this peaceful village are a few lonely rooftops and the steeple of the local church. And no, this is not the kind of place you want to go diving to check out the ruins of the creepy village. You might come out on the other side with 3 or maybe 4 eyeballs. Mermaid playing piano. A mermaid playing the piano does not sound inherently creepy. It actually sounds a little romantic, but if you were to dive off the coast of the Bahamas and stumble upon the lazy mermaid lounging by her grand piano, you might be a little disturbed. It's definitely creepier than you might imagine, and it loses all its romanticism the moment you lay eyes on the freaky mermaid and her slowly decaying piano. But you might be wondering why there's a mermaid playing the piano under the water in the Bahamas. It all comes down to the fact that you can actually buy your own island here, and one of the lunatics who purchased their very own island is the famous illusionist David Copperfield. As if buying his own island was not weird enough, he had sculptures commissioned and then sank in about 15 feet of water near his island. Since then, the place has become a really popular destination for snorkeling, and while once you break the surface and look around you can see how beautiful the surroundings are, it's still creepy to bump into unusual sculptures like these sitting at the bottom of the sea. New Jersey's lost locomotives. Believe it or not, one of the creepiest places you can visit right now is off the coast of New Jersey. It's a train graveyard that was discovered a few years back by archaeologists. Not only is this place creepy with its abandoned locomotives, but it's also a complete mystery as to when and how the steam engines were sunk. Experts believe they came from the 1850s, and the report from the Daily Mail claims that they are still sitting 90 feet under the water. The best explanation that archaeologists could come up with is that the engines were somehow lost in a violent storm 5 miles from the coast of New Jersey when they were being transported across the Atlantic. However, why there are no records of these locomotives being lost is a mystery, and to be quite honest, the whole situation is a little weird. After being underwater for 160 years, the locomotives are in surprisingly good shape. They almost look like they're still trying to race across the bottom of the ocean. It's definitely a creepy and kind of surreal experience to be swimming with ancient locomotives. The New Jersey Museum of Transportation has begun efforts to figure out what exactly should be done with the old vehicles, which by the way are Planet Class 222T models, very similar to the original Pioneer steam locomotive. Even when these things were made 160 years ago, they were already out of date. Kamikaze dolphins from North Korea. It's hard to say if this next discovery is creepy, insane, or just plain ridiculous. Popular Mechanics has reported that satellite images of a river in the country of North Korea have revealed that the nation is keeping a population of dolphins, and experts believe they are likely for military purposes. Now you might be wondering what exactly a country like North Korea would be doing with military dolphins, and it's very likely that their military is training the dolphins to carry out attacks on an enemy ship in a time of war. The location of the dolphins was first spotted by the United States Naval Institute News' H.I. Sutton. The location was initially found to have 2 circular pens, but within just a few years they have added 3 more pens, and this has led experts to believe that they are acquiring more and more dolphins for military reasons. Dolphins in the military are nothing new. The United States Navy has used dolphins to tag underwater mines and to rescue divers and detect saboteurs. But it's believed that the North Koreans are using their dolphins for much more menacing means. It could very well be that the North Koreans are creating kamikaze dolphins. This would mean that a dolphin could be equipped with some kind of explosive device, which the animal would then use to attack and destroy a vessel while destroying itself in the process. However, as of right now, the truth of the North Korean dolphins is unknown. Much of this is just speculation and educated guessing. Hopefully, we never know for sure if they are truly training evil kamikaze dolphins in North Korea, and if they are, hopefully they never use them. Medieval soldier. At the bottom of a lake in Lithuania, a gruesome and creepy discovery has been made. For over 500 years, a medieval soldier has been rotting away at the bottom of this lake, half hidden underneath the mud with his weapons of war still surrounding him. The skeleton was discovered just recently during an underwater investigation of an old bridge in the east of the country at Lake Asveja. Suffice to say, this was not something that the investigators had expected to find. According to a researcher with Klaipeda University, the skeleton was not actually buried even though it was discovered under a significant amount of sand. Instead, it's believed that he likely fell into the water while trying to cross a bridge that had spanned the lake in the 16th or 17th century. In those days, the bridge led over the lake to Dubinji Castle, which sat on a hilltop just over the lake. It's unsure what exactly caused the guy to fall off the bridge. He could have been a knight leaving the castle, maybe a guy who drank too much mead and lost his balance. It could have been an ancient murder. We just don't know at this point. Nonetheless, it definitely freaked out the workmen who had been trying to investigate the shape of the bridge. Port Royal. A lot of people are not familiar with Port Royal, Jamaica. Back in the 1600s, it was referred to as the wickedest city on earth. It was like Las Vegas in the 60s and 70s, except with a lot more violence, destruction, and heathenism. But in 1692, Port Royal was destroyed by an earthquake and most of the town was swallowed by the sea. Today it's nothing but a small fishing village, but the true remains of this disturbing place are just off the shore submerged under a bit of water. The remnants of the city were not properly discovered again until the 1960s, and since then, there have been all kinds of creepy discoveries being made in this once horrifying city of sin. From tobacco pipes to corked wine bottles, there are countless artifacts lost in the ruins of Port Royal. But the creepiest thing of all is just to see the destroyed city in the blackness of the deep and to envision all the wretched things that happened there. The Neptune Memorial Reef. The Neptune Memorial Reef is literally a city of the dead. This terrifying underwater graveyard is located just a few miles from the coast of Florida and about 40 feet beneath the surface of the ocean. And yes, it is very much a real city. It has stone roads, towering gates, and imposing ruins. While this place was never technically discovered, there have undoubtedly been one or two rather surprised divers who happened upon the underwater burial ground completely by accident, and that would be alarming. You can actually pay money to be buried inside this graveyard. Cremated remains are placed inside of concrete memorials and then sunk into the underwater necropolis. Your loved ones can then come and visit you, albeit with a scuba suit on. While there are not enough ghost stories to scare away visitors, it's certainly a place with a creepy atmosphere, and you might find yourself freaked out as you swim down the narrow corridors and behold the strange architecture and bronze statues of the memorials. One of the more famous residents of the underwater city is a man named Bert Kilbride, who had once been listed as the oldest living scuba diver by the Guinness Book of World Records. He actually has a place of high honor at the Neptune Memorial Reef. Bert is currently interred at the top of one of the entry columns that you will find at the gates of the necropolis. Secret Nazi Base. Antarctica has no shortage of unsettling discoveries. Weird stuff is being found here all the time. And ever since the 1940s, people have been talking about secret Nazi bases lost on the continent of Antarctica. But the truth is a little stranger than that. Adolf Hitler definitely ordered an expedition to Antarctica, completely shrouded in secrecy about 80 years ago. This was back in 1936. And believe it or not, Hitler's idea of populating Antarctica had a lot to do with margarine. They were already preparing for war, and the Nazis knew that they would need a lot of whale oil in order to have sufficient margarine for the population. So the idea was that the Nazis would sail down to Antarctica, set up a base, and then harvest whale oil by hunting the giant beasts. The expedition set off in 1938, led by a decorated World War I naval commander. It took the crew about 4 months to reach the coastline of Antarctica, and they then began a survey of the land using flying boats. Keep in mind that this is before much of the region had ever been explored and it was all very new. However, nothing really worked out the way it was supposed to. According to History.com, one of the air crews threw out a giant box of small metal swastikas, which was a way for them to lay claim to the territory, and it's still believed that those swastikas are scattered across Antarctica to this day. But as for a base, they never actually built one. Despite all the rumors and claims of secret Nazi bases in Antarctica, history says it never happened. There has been no physical evidence that the Germans ever set up a permanent station in Antarctica before 1981. Nonetheless, that box full of metal swastikas is still buried in the snow somewhere, and one day it's going to make a very impressive archaeological discovery. UFO evidence. Is there proof of alien life hiding in Antarctica? This is a question that has been thrown around a lot lately, but a recent unsettling discovery may be the final piece of evidence we need. A video has been uploaded online that appears to show a disk roughly 60 feet wide jutting out from the snow and ice of Antarctica. The object appears to have been frozen in the ice for a significant amount of time, but is now beginning to reveal itself because of the thawing snow. Part of it is still underground, but the satellite image clearly shows something mysterious and shaped like a disk. Could it truly be a lost UFO? Unfortunately, this mysterious thing might just be a lake. These satellite images are so blurry that you can interpret the images in whichever way you choose. This could be an unsettling discovery of a UFO, or it could just be a lake located on Antarctica. It could also just be a rock. It's likely that the video online was slightly edited to make the circular object appear more like an object and less like a naturally occurring geological feature. But don't let this news bring you down. There is still a chance that somewhere underneath the shrinking ice caps of our southern hemisphere, a stranded UFO is waiting to be found. Unexpected fossils. There's nothing better than an unexpected discovery, especially in a place like Antarctica. A new discovery of a fossil is seriously freaking people out. It's been labeled as the real-life Loch Ness Monster, and according to Fox News, scientists are absolutely shocked. The fossilized remains found by scientists belong to a creature known as an elasmosaur, and it lived about 70 million years ago. This beast would have weighed up to 15 tons, and that makes it one of the largest plesiosaurs of its kind ever discovered anywhere on Earth. The reason it's being called the Loch Ness Monster is because fossil hunters claim that in life, this enormous beast would have looked exactly like how we envision the Loch Ness Monster. It would have had a very long neck, a kind of oblong body, and 4 long flippers. As you may already know, some theories claim that the Loch Ness Monster is in fact a type of dinosaur that has somehow continued to live inside a small Scottish lake. And with this newest fossil from Antarctica, people are now saying that Nessie could be an elasmosaur. These animals definitely lived across the planet, but it would still not make any sense for one to be alive in Loch Ness. This is because Loch Ness only became a body of water roughly 10,000 years ago, and these ancient marine dinos went extinct 65 million years ago. Remains of murder. Antarctica has a dark side. It's not just a frozen wasteland with a single ATM and a whole lot of cute penguins. In 1985, there was a horrifying and extremely unsettling discovery made in this remote place. A woman's skull was found on Yamana Beach in the south of Antarctica. The skull belonged to an indigenous woman from Chile in her early 20s, and researchers believe that she died between 1819 and 1825 at a camp made by sealers. Female sealers were unheard of for that time, so it's highly likely that the indigenous woman had a more nefarious purpose for being in Antarctica. There have been no documents explaining how she came to be there, so it really is just hearsay and speculation, but that doesn't make the skull any less unsettling. The ice is almost gone. Perhaps one of the most unsettling discoveries that has ever come out of Antarctica is something we all already know. This place is running out of ice. In just a few decades, the continent of Antarctica has lost trillions of tons of ice. While people can argue against climate change all they want, there's no debating the facts. There is also no debating the newest discovery of a void growing beneath West Antarctica that scientists claim is nearly the size of Manhattan. This void has been found underneath a glacier that holds roughly 250 billion tons of ice. According to a professional JPL radar scientist researching this mysterious void, it's a sure sign that the glacier is bound for melting, and sooner rather than later. Because the void beneath the glacier is so large, it allows in more heat and more water, which causes it to melt quicker. If the glacier melts rapidly, the oceans of the world will lift by about 2 feet, but that's not even the worst part. This particular glacier, which by the way is known as Thwaites Glacier, holds up its neighboring glaciers, and once it melts, the others will quickly follow. We will then see a devastating domino effect. If you're not unsettled now by this newest discovery, just wait until your house is underwater. Ancient rainforest. While the fact that scientists have discovered traces of an ancient rainforest in Antarctica is not in itself unsettling, the implications kind of are. It is a bit freaky to think that this frozen wasteland once held a magnitude of life and maybe even humans. About 90 million years ago, Antarctica would have been very hot. An expedition in 2017 revealed that the sediment composition 90 feet beneath the surface of the ocean is extremely different to the sediment composition of the surface. Further investigation showed an intricate network of plant roots completely fossilized under the waters of Antarctica. Microscopic analyses then found evidence of spores and pollen. All of this points to the fact that a huge rainforest did indeed exist in Antarctica eons before the area was transformed into a zone of ice and snow. Not only did a huge rainforest exist, but it was likely a temperate and swampy forest like what you would find in New Zealand today. But none of this changes the fact that even millions of years ago, there still would have been an Antarctic winter in which the continent was shrouded in darkness for 4 months out of the year. Scientists then had to look at the CO2 levels that would have existed back then. What they discovered was that the Earth was so hot in those days that the average air temperature even during an Antarctic winter would have hovered at around 54 degrees. And this is where things get disturbing. Climate scientists say that as the Earth continues heating, these temperatures could come around again, and the Antarctica we know of now could once more turn into a rainforest. Secret ruins. Let's continue looking into Antarctica's mysterious past. For a long time, there have been rumors that a hidden city is frozen beneath the ice of Antarctica. And while the recent evidence of a rainforest existing on the continent definitely helps out this theory, there's actually a bit more to it than that. The theory is known as crustal displacement, and it alleges that the Earth's crust moved in such a way about 12,000 years ago that caused Antarctica to move dramatically south. The theory says that Antarctica would have been much more in the north, closer to Europe, and it would have held a secret civilization. But with the crustal displacement, Antarctica got pushed to the southern tip of the Earth, and the civilization was frozen over with ice, and we have yet to uncover it again. This is still only a theory, but some recent images from Google Earth appear to have revealed a pyramid sticking out of the snow in the tundra. And while scientists were quick to claim that it was not a pyramid at all, but just a mountain that looked like a pyramid, nobody actually knows 100%. The pyramid very well could have just been part of an ancient civilization whose structures we will only begin to find as the ice continues to thaw. The Piri Reis Map and Lost Atlantis. One of the more unsettling clues to the ancient history of Antarctica wasn't actually discovered on the continent, but get ready to have your mind blown nonetheless. The Piri Reis map was drawn in 1513 and is the earliest surviving map of the Americas. The map shows North America, South America, Greenland, and Antarctica, none of which had yet been discovered. The mystery surrounding this map is monumental. The fellow who drew it, named Piri Reis, had been a high-ranking official in the Turkish Navy, and this had given him special access to the Imperial Library in Constantinople. It's said that in the early 1500s, he met a man who had a mysterious map of the New World, and that Piri Reis based his 1513 map on the one this mysterious man showed him. He also based it on some antique charts that had allegedly survived the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. After it was drawn, it ended up being lost within the Imperial Palace of Constantinople until 1929, when scholars stumbled upon it completely by accident. And here's where Antarctica and Atlantis come into play. The map was drawn in 1513, and yet Antarctica was not discovered until 1820. The map also shows Antarctica as not being covered in ice, but that would have been thousands of years before. Furthermore, it shows Antarctica being connected to South America, which it has not been for millions of years. Because of these oddities, there have been many theories put forward throughout the years. Some claim the map was based on aerial photographs taken from an alien ship. Others say that the map showed Antarctica as being a fully occupied civilization that could have been Atlantis. It's a lot of speculation with no discernible proof, but the fact that somebody drew a continent with shocking accuracy several hundred years before anyone had ever seen it with their eyes is nothing short of unsettling. Organism 46b. This next one is completely out to lunch, but it's been reported by so many legitimate news sources like Express News that there may be a grain of truth to it. Allegedly, during an expedition to a subterranean lake in Antarctica, Russian scientists discovered a horrifying creature that is being called Organism 46b. This discovery happened at Lake Vostok, and it's apparently being covered up now by Russian officials who are trying to weaponize the mysterious creature. From what has been told in the news reports, the scientists found a killer squid with 14 legs and the ability to hypnotize and paralyze a human being at a shocking distance of 150 feet by squirting them with poisonous venom. In these reports, it has also been claimed that Vladimir Putin is trying to use the creature to create a secret weapon. How much of this is true is anybody's guess. There could very well be a giant super squid living underneath the Antarctic ice in Lake Vostok, and yes, it's also possible that it killed 2 scientists just like the reports claimed. However, this would be an absolute anomaly in the animal world. Not only do squids not hunt scientists for sport, but they probably would not survive very well in an underwater lake without enough food to eat. Still, it's an unsettling story, and if true, absolutely terrifying. The Antarctic Cubes. The Antarctic cubes are absolutely bizarre. The image of the cubes was first taken in Antarctica in 1995, and yes, it's 100% legitimate. The photographs even won the top prize in the Royal Society's annual scientific photography competition in 2017. These cubes are unsettling at first, but there is a perfectly logical explanation. It's called bidirectional crevassing. What happens is that as the ice sheets spread and thin, cracks form parallel to whichever way the ice is moving forward. This is because even though the sheets of ice in Antarctica look solid, they are always moving, even if it is very slowly. After cracks spread parallel, the ice will continue to stretch and then more cracks appear perpendicular. In the end, it creates the effect of a grid of ice blocks. The troghs between the blocks actually contain flowing ice and snow, much like rivers. It's one of the strangest and yet captivating geological phenomena that goes on in Antarctica, and it's great because it has nothing to do with aliens or secret societies. Which of these discoveries unsettled you the most? Let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and come back soon for another fantastic video. Do you think we will be able to turn things around and keep Antarctica from melting?